This video is to help you learn how to examine graphs of functions for their domain range, increasing and decreasing and constant intervals. And so we're going to start out by just looking for the domain. Okay, the domain is always the x values and range is always y. But let's start with the domain. So what we're going to be looking at are the horizontal values that are possible for this domain, for this range. And so here's the way you can look at it. Look at the orange line I just drew. That's a horizontal line. So we're going to look and see what is the leftmost, the smallest value for the x. And if we look right here, it's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is -8 on the x-axis. So I know that is the first point. So I'm going to draw it right there. Okay? And that's -8. And then I know that it continues on. Your values here. And then I notice that right here at +3, there's a break. And then there's nothing until I get to, let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's nothing until I get to 6, and then it continues into infinity. So it started at -8. It went solid. There were x values for the function all the way until I got to 3. Then there was this gap, and it picked up again at 6 and went to infinity. So when I write the interval for that, remember that I always use, if it equals it, I use the hard bracket. And then it goes to 3, and it's open because it's a circle here. So it means it doesn't really equal 3. It just gets right up next to it. And I'm going to union that. And again, the 6 is going to have the open bracket, and infinity always has open. So that would be my range. And then if I want to look at my range, that would be my domain, excuse me, I think I said range. So now let's do the same thing, but let's look at the y. So this is going to be our range. So I'm going to start down here at the bottom, and I notice there are no values for along the y-axis until I get to -2, and that has an open bracket, open circle on it. And then there are y values all the way up until I get to 3, and so they go from -2 to 3. Their values all in here. And then there's this big gap until I get to, let's see what that is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Until I get to 8, and there's constant values. Okay, so that's a place where the y is constant. So for my range for this one, I would write open circle for -2. That's my smallest value. And their values all the way to 3 along the y-axis. And then I'm going to union that with just, what did we say that was? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. With my constant. Okay, so now I'm going to look at where is this function increasing and where is it decreasing. Remember, my function is the line, or the lines all in red here. And there's really no place where it's increasing, so there's just nothing to write. Okay, there's none. If I look at where it's decreasing, I can see that it's decreasing along here. Notice it's decreasing. The slope is decreasing. And I always do, when I'm talking and describing increasing, decreasing, and constant, I always do that in relation to my x-axis. So if I look there, I know that it is decreasing from the 8 to 3. So it's decreasing from 8, negative 8, excuse me, to positive 3. And for increasing and decreasing, you always use open brackets because technically at the point it's neither falling nor rising, so it's a zero slope at the vertex. So always use open brackets. And then that's the only place it's decreasing. And then where is it constant? It's constant along this interval right here. So I know that from 6 to infinity, it's constant. Okay, so let's look at the blue function. So again, I'm going to look at my domain first. So my domain is along the x-axis, so that's a horizontal. And I notice that it goes to negative infinity. And the first little hole that I have is right here, and that's at 1, 2, 3, 4. That's at negative 4. But everything in there is solid. And then it picks up at negative 4 again and goes to 0. And there's this hole here, but I notice it's covered here. So there are really values. So x is 0, the function is equal to 1, so I'm okay there. And then when I continue in the positive direction, there continue to be values for x. In fact, there are values all the way to here, which is the 4. But then even at 4, even though this hole is here, x at 4, the function at 4 is 4. And then as I increase in the positive infinity direction, it jumps down to the bottom, jumps down to the 4th quadrant. And so I have more values. So really it continues on and into infinity. So if I'm describing this line right here, this would be negative infinity, and then there's this break at negative 4, but then it continues off into positive infinity. So I would write that in interval notation as negative infinity to negative 4, union that with, it picks up after negative 4 again and goes to infinity. So to describe my range, I notice that my smallest value, it goes into negative infinity in the y direction. Remember, range is y. And it goes to negative 6. This is negative 6. And then it doesn't start back up again until it gets to negative 2. Then it's solid. There are values all along the y-axis here because of this out here. And then they continue, and then they continue off into infinity. Into positive infinity. So to write that interval, it would be negative infinity, because remember down here it's going to negative infinity, to negative 6, union with negative 2 to infinity. If I look at my increasing intervals, and you read increasing intervals and decreasing intervals from left to right, just like you would read the pages in a book. So if I look at the increasing ones, I notice that it's increasing here, okay, and that's the only place. And so that interval Remember that I'm doing all of these along the x. You read all of these along the x. So it's increasing from 0 to 4, and that's the only place. And where is it decreasing? It's decreasing, I'm reading it left to right, remember, from here to, so negative infinity to negative 4. And then it starts decreasing again down here. So I'll union that with 4 to infinity. Now remember, I'm using the x-axis to describe my increasing and decreasing. So where this last interval, I'm looking along the x-axis, so it's from 4, and then positive infinity goes this way, and so I'm looking at it along the x, not the y. That's why it's positive infinity and not negative. And where is it constant? It's constant from negative 4 to 0. Okay, and that's the review for examining graphs of functions to find their domain, their range, and the increasing, decreasing, and constant intervals.